Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students, and very good morning to you. Welcome back. Uh, Today we are going to discuss the second part of post-structuralism. If you remember, uh, we already discussed the first part of post-structuralism, and we discussed it's a kind of shift from structure to anti-structure, and the key figures were called the Gang of Four, uh, in which there is we discussed Derrida. Now today we are going to discuss Foucault, Barthes, and Lacan. Kristeva is another prominent figure in post-structuralist paradigm. Uh, these Gang of Four were grouped because of because of the timing. All were translated into English in during 60s and 70s in US campuses. Uh, there was a conference in Johns Hopkins in 1966. The languages of criticism and the science of man. Derrida's talk on structure, sign, and play is called the start of post-structuralism in United States. They are called Gang of Four because they shared all attacked stable structures, the humanist subject, the objective truth, all said language discourse shapes reality, and they also uh, give literature critics new ways to break text apart instead of finding one true meaning. Uh, they did literary criticism, Derrida and co, including Foucault, Barthes, and Lacan. Uh, read the text, find the unity, ignore authors, history, uh, after French theory, before the French theory, uh, the close reading was encouraged of the text to find the unity and ignore the author history. But with this French theory, which started with the deconstruction of Derrida, the deconstruction looked for contradictions that undo the text's own claims. Now, moving on from Derrida to uh, Foucault, one of the very influential figures in the modern philosophy and history and literature. Foucault was he was the pioneer of one of the greatest movements in the history of literature and philosophy. Uh, he talks about discourse, power, and subject. Now, if Derrida works within the space of language and philosophy, Foucault historicizes the problem. It's not only, he doesn't only focus on language and philosophy, but Foucault tends to historicize it, uh, in historicize the problem. He is less interested in the play of signifiers than in historical conditions that make certain statements possible and others unthinkable. So he talks about power, discourse, power, and the subject. So let's begin with the Foucault, the discourse and the author function. Uh, the first part of Foucault, he talks about discourse, not just language, but practices that systematically form the objects of which they speak. Discourse produces what counts as knowledge, truth, and reality. So for him, discourse is not just a language, it is a kind of a mindset, it's a kind of practice that systematically forms the objects of which they speak, discourse produces what counts as knowledge, truth, and reality. And then power knowledge, he talks about power knowledge. Power is not merely repressive, it is productive. Knowledge is an instrument of power. For him, uh, modernity has used this enlightenment as an instrument of power. We are going to discuss this later on when we discuss postmodernism, Foucault's contribution towards that. But he focuses on power, knowledge, power and knowledge, and for him, it is productive knowledge is an instrument of power, and power shapes what can be known. The author function. The author function is not a person, but a principle of thrift in the proliferation of meaning. It limits, controls, and defines the meaning of a text. The question is not who is the author, but how does author function operate in a given discourse? For him, discourse is not just a language, it is a system of practices, institutions, and statements that systematically produce the objects of which they speak. Medicine, for example, does not simply discover illness, it creates categories, institutions, and norms that define what counts as health and sickness. It is very kind of thought-provoking statement if you think about it, that he's trying to change the whole paradigm or the whole way of thinking about knowledge. What does it entail? So for example, if you take the example of medicine, uh, medicine does not simply discover the illness; it creates categories, institutions, and norms that define what counts as health and sickness. For example, uh, suppose there is a standard of diabetes. I mean, the doctors or the medicines or medical professionals, they have defined, they have set a threshold of a sugar level, and they consider someone diabetic because of someone crosses that threshold. But that is again a power game, because some of the medical professionals think that this has been set by some uh, controversial uh, pharmaceutical companies in order to sell their medicine. So this is what basically uh, Foucault means when he talks about power and knowledge. So crucially, power is not merely a negative force that represses, but power is a productive. It produces knowledge, subjectivity, and truth. Hence, his famous formulation of power knowledge, they are mutually constitutive. For him, power and knowledge, they are mutually constitutive. We cannot have knowledge without power relations. And power operates most effectively through the production of truth. So basically, what he's trying to say is that it is the power which produces knowledge. It is the power, it is the uh, particular uh, group of people or particular regime in power that basically disseminates knowledge, that defines what is true and what is false. So for him, knowledge is the production of power, and it has been misused throughout the history. He moves on, and then the author function to the author function. In his essay, "What is an Author?" Foucault responds to what is death of the author argument. He agrees that the author is not a transcendent source of meaning, but he argues that the author is not simply dead. The author, rather, the author is a function of discourse. The author functions as he or she defines how a text is received and classified. For example, a literary text versus scientific text limits the proliferation of meaning. Without the author, any text could mean anything. The author the author, the author provides a simple a principle of thrift. It varies across historical periods and genres. In the Middle East, in the Middle Ages, scientific texts required an author's name. Literary texts were often anonymous. Today, it is the opposite. For the literary critic, this shifts the question from what did the author intend to how does the author function operate in the text and what does it exclude. Moving on to the next step of Foucault's uh, thesis, for him, he moves on then to the next step and he talks about episteme and the subject. So, what is episteme? The historical a priori that defines the conditions of possibility for knowledge in a given era. Now, the term a priori is a philosophical term which needs a sort of explanation. There are two kind of truths in philosophy. Uh, One is called a priori, and the other is called a posteriori. The a priori truths are the knowledge is considered to be those truths or those principles which do not require any sense experience, uh, such as mathematical truths. We do not learn these by our experiences. On the other hand, a posteriori truth is something which we learn from the experience. Like, oh, when I see a whiteboard, I can tell that this board is white, or whatever we gain through our sense perception, that is called posteriori. So the historical a priori, the historically those truths which are considered to be a priori, which are considered to be inborn in human mind, that defines the conditions of possibility of knowledge in a given era, that is episteme. Different epochs have radically different epistemes, such as different periods of, for example, Renaissance, the classical, the modern, and now obviously the postmodern time. So in his work in Orders of Things, Foucault introduces the concept of esteem, the historical a priori that defines the conditions of possibility of knowledge in a given era. He identifies three epistemes, such as Renaissance, uh, that is focused on resemblance, the classical, that is focused on representation, and the modern, the analytic of finitude. In the modern episteme, man emerges as an object of knowledge, both the one who knows and what is known. So, but this figure of man is historical invention. Foucault famously concludes that man will soon be erased, or the death of man. Foucault argues that man as a concept is a recent invention and will soon be erased, like a face drawn in sand at the edge of the sea. The subject is not universal, it is an effect of discourse. The man emerges as an object of knowledge, both the one who knows and what is known. But this figure of man is historical invention. Foucault famously concludes that this is not a prediction that human will disappear, but a claim that the concept of a unified sovereign subject is a product of specific historical configuration and it is dissolving. The concept of man for him is basically uh, throughout the history which we have had is 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 disappearing. It's disappearing. The concept of unified sovereign subject basically has been a product of specific historical eras and configuration. We have been depicted by different eras as a man in different kind of sovereign subject, and it is dissolving for Foucault. It is dissolving now. In his work, Discipline and Punish, Foucault analyzes how modern power operates through surveillance and normalization. That is called panopticism for him. The disciplinary power operates through surveillance, producing docile bodies. The subject is constituted by power relations not prior to them. Now, what does it mean? It is through pan the panopticism the panopticism or Jeremy Bentham, a 20th century utilitarian philosopher, designed for a prison where he designed a prison where inmates cannot know when they are being watched, becomes a metaphor for disciplinary society for Foucault. He takes the example of Jeremy Benthams who designed a prison in which the prisoners would not know they have been watched, but they were observed, they were watched continuously. So he takes this metaphor for disciplinary society. Power is no longer exercised by sovereign, public torture spectacle, but is dispersed, internalized. Subject, subjects discipline themselves because they may always be under observation. So it's a kind of concept, it's a kind of mindset infused that they have been washed, uh, it is dispersed, internalized. So subjects discipline themselves because they consider, they think that they have been watched. For literary studies, this framework it helps us analyze how text participate in production of normal subjects, how they encode power relations, and how they resist or reinscribe disciplinary norms. So basically, what Foucault tries to do, he brings the attention, he draws our attention not from the text to the power, to the power discourse. For him, it's discourse and the author are function for discourse, power knowledge uh, concept, and the author function. For him, author is not present, is not a person, but a principle of theft in the proliferation of meaning. And then for him, episteme is the a priori truths, the knowledge, which possibility of the knowledge in a given era. And we have been infused, we have been internalized by different eras in different times that what is knowledge and what is power. So it has been always power which controls the knowledge, how much we know, what do we know, and who are we basically. The death of man, same concept, uh, which was uh, presented by the earlier structuralists. he says that it's a kind of man is not the author is not dead, but it's dissolving, it's disappearing. Man emerges as an object of knowledge, both the one who knows and what is known. And the panopticism, a disciplinary power, operates through surveillance, producing docile bodies. The subject is constituted by power relations, not prior to them. So it's not the subject which is prior to the knowledge. It is constituted by the power relations, by the hegemony, by the regime, which infuses a particular kind of mindset in it. So it's power struggle basically for him. So the literary criticism by the lens of Foucault, it's all about power struggle. It's all about knowledge and power. It's not uh, concentrated only upon the text. So we move on to the next French philosopher, French thinker in literary criticism, one of the those Gang of Four. Uh, Barthes, Roland Barthes, the pleasure of text. Roland Barthes' career is a perfect example of the trajectory from structuralism to post-structuralism. If you remember, to begin with, his stance was structuralist. He sought to describe the language of literature, the system of literature, but moves to post-structuralist position by saying that he embraces the joyous, the bliss, the pleasure of the text. Uh, his key essays were The Death of the Author, The Language Which Speaks, Not the Author, From Work to Text, The Text is Plural, Irreducible, A Process of Signification Without Closure, and the pleasure of the text, distinction between pleasure, comfortable reading, and joyous, disruptive, ecstatic reading that unsettles the reader's identity. So, Barthes' death of the author is a key transitional text. Barthes argues that author is a modern figure, the product of capitalism. To give a text an author is to impose a limit, a final signified. Instead, Barthes insists that the text is tissue of patience, drawn from countless cultural codes. The unity of the text lies not in its origin, the author, but in the destination, the reader. Yet the reader too is not a stable subject. The reader is constituted by the very text she reads. From work to text, in his work to text elaborates uh, this work is a closed object. The work is a closed object. The text is a methodological field, a process. The text is experienced in activity production. It is plural, irreducible to a single meaning. And moving on to pleasure of text, uh, introduces the pleasure of text introduces a distinction that has become central to post-structuralist criticism. The pleasure, the comfortable reading experience that confirms the reader's identity and cultural expectations, and bliss, a disruptive, ecstatic experience that unsettles the reader, shatters identity, and exceeds meaning. For the critic, the task is not to interpret the text, but to attend to its joys, to its bliss, to the moments where language breaks down, where meaning becomes excessive, where the text resists discourse, where the text resists closure, where the text is basically it it shatters it the identity of the reader. So it's not a closure. It's resistance towards the closure. It gives new birth to new meanings. So Barth has also moved from structuralist position to post-structuralism, uh, especially from work to text, his works from work to text and the pleasure of the text. Uh, After Barthes, there is another important figure in post-structuralism, and that is called, his name is Jacques Lacan, the unconscious structured like a language. Lacan's return to Freud, basically he was a psychoanalyst, and what is psychoanalysis? Again, we would discuss when we will talk about uh, the literary criticism approach of psychoanalytic uh, school of thought. So he was basically he was inspired by Freud. He returned to Freud, reconstructs psychoanalysis through structural linguistics. He famously declares that the unconscious is structured like a language. This profound implications for this is very profound implication for the literary theory. There are three. He rereads Freud through Saussure and Jacobson and declares that there are three orders. Lacan distinguishes three registers. The first one he calls the imaginary, the order of the ego, images, and misrecognition. It is dominated by the mirror stage, where the infant identifies with the unified image of the self, an image that is fundamentally alienating. So the realm of the ego, misrecognition, the mirror stage, this is the first stage. The he just to remind you, he's trying to reread Freud through Saussure and Jacobson. So that is how he's trying to reconstruct that principle. The first stage for him is the imaginary, the second is the symbolic. The order of language, law, and social structure in entry into the symbolic. The name of the Father is what makes subjectivity possible, but it also entails loss, the loss of immediate connection to the mother, the loss of wholeness. The subject is split and never coinciding with itself. So the symbolic, the order of language, law, and the name of the Father, entry into the. I've received a warning from Zoom that our meeting is going to end soon because of this version. So I'll try to go through quickly as possible. So the third stage or the third the order is the real, not reality, but which resists symbolization, the traumatic kernel that cannot be integrated into the symbolic order. The real is impossible, yet it haunts the subject. So the key concepts, the subject is split. So the key concept desire is the desire of the other. There is no meta language, no absolute standpoint outside the language. So language basically is the construction of reality. Extra linguistics reality go to ground meaning. So for Lacan, he rethinks desire. Desire is not a biological drive. It is desire for the other, both the other person and the symbolic order itself, because the other is also lacking. There is no meta language Desire is insatiable. Lacan provides a framework for analyzing how characters are constituted by language and desire. For example, a character's speech may reveal split between what they say and what they mean. And also, he provides us with the framework which says that how narrative structures encode the symbolic order and how texts approach the real, the unsayable that haunts representation. The real that which resists symbolization is the impossible for him. How text approaches the real. So it's I mean it's not something structured, it is deconstructed. So from Barthes, we move on to Julia Kristeva and her stances of intertextuality and the semiotic. Julia Kristeva bridges structuralism and post-structuralism and feminism. She, being a feminist, obviously, she introduces two key concepts that remain essential. For her, it's not a method, but a critical product that identifies binary oppositions in a text, shows the hierarchy, one term is privileged over the other, demonstrates that the privileged term depends on the subordinated term for its meaning and that the hierarchy can be reversed or destabilized. So, as I said, that she tries to bridge structuralism with post-structuralism and feminism, and that is how she presents her thesis. The key example is Derrida's reading of Rousseau of grammatology in writing treated as dangerous supplement to speech, yet speech itself is already structured like writing, art writing. Um, though the term intertextuality is often, sorry, though the term is often used loosely, the intertextuality, Christova's original formulation is precise, not text is a self-contained unity. Every text is an absorption and transformation of other texts. This means that meaning is not immanent in a work, it emerges from the interplay of codes, quotations, and cultural references. For the critic, the task is to trace those intertextual relations, not to find sources, but to analyze how the text weaves together existing discourse. So for her, intertextuality is not something which is loosely used. For her, the original formulation is precise. No text is a self-contained unity. So every text is an absorption of transformation of other texts. This means that meaning is not immanent, it's not fixed. In a work, it emerges from the interplay of codes, quotations, and cultural references. And for the critic, for her, the critic's task is to trace those intertextual relations, not to find the sources, but to analyze how text weaves together existing discourses. Then uh, she moves to semiotic symbolism, semiotic and symbolic. Uh, she distinguishes between semiotic and symbolic. Kristeva draws on Lacan and psychoanalysis to distinguish two modalities of signification. The symbolic, the realm of grammar, syntax, judgment, and the law of the father. It is the domain of stable meaning, propositional language, and social orders. On the other hand, semiotic is a pre-linguistic, rhythmatic, pulsional energy associated with the mother's body. It manifests in rhythm, tone, contradiction, laughter, and the materiality of language. The semiotic disrupts the symbolic introduction, multiplicity, and excess. For Casanova avant-garde texts allow the semiotic to erupt within the symbolic. These texts do not communicate a message, they signify in the sense of producing a process of signification. This is where literary language becomes revolutionary. It unsettles the subject and challenges established meaning. So the key to take away the key things, the key concepts in this post-structuralism, it starts with this deconstruction of Derrida. It unpacks the binary oppositions in a text, show how the text undermines its own claim to stable meaning. And then Foucault comes with the discourse analysis, examine what counts as truth or knowledge in a text, consider the power relations that shape its discourse. Then Lacan's intertextuality, trace the network of texts and codes that a work absorbs and transforms. And then Christopher's split subject, analyze how the text represents or fails to represent the uh, descended divide self. Uh, the criticism on post-structuralism are generally the terms which are followed. Relativism, if all meaning is indeterminate, how can we make ethical or political judgments? That's the most prominent criticism on post-structuralism, which does not believe in the fixed meaning. So it raises the question that how can we make ethical or political judgments? Does it lead to nihilism, meaninglessness? The second criticism is obscurantism. Critics accuse post-structuralist writing of being deliberately difficult and elitist. So it's not very simple or straightforward, which could be understood. And that is another criticism on it, that they intentionally brought this text, the writings to be obscure, which cannot be understood by the layman. Um, a historicism. Uh, Through Foucault historicizes deconstruction's focus on language can seem detached from material history and class